or against the Houthis in Yemen. He says, Israel, knock it off. Get a ceasefire. We're going to withhold your weapons until you do. And we're going to keep the sanctions relief for Iran. That's madness, Mark. It's complete madness. And it is why we are in a situation of the Middle East on fire.
And so the Middle East is on fire. This is a very interesting tweet by a guy named Andrew Fox. Let me blow this one up. Today, Hamas social media line to take is the first photo. I've seen it twice already. They appear to be trying to spin the damage to Gaza as something unusual or especially vindictive on the part of Israel. The second and third photos are Mosul. We did that. In Mosul, we were fighting ISIS. Hamas and ISIS are different, but in terms of animalistic, inhuman behavior against Israelis and their own people, they are entirely comparable. Israel's war against Hamas is every bit as valid and necessary as our war against ISIS. And he's right. So, and then Haviv Rediger, who is an excellent commentator, sort of a centrist, I think, in Israel, says this in response: this is wisdom. War is actually hell, unspeakable hell, and Hamas hungers for it and built Gaza for it for 17 years. The vast tunnel system under Gaza's cities is the biggest thing Palestinians have ever built. Hamas bent Gaza's entire economy to its construction, and the tunnel's sole purpose is to force this level of destruction if an enemy ever comes for Hamas. This is why no civilian has been allowed to step foot in any tunnel in 10 months of war. And he's right. So here's this. So here's the pictures of Mosul. By the way, on the left, these are the pictures you see in that tweet. On the left is Gaza, this terrible destruction. On the right is Mosul. Do you remember these pictures from just a few years ago when we were taking out ISIS in Mosul? By the way, remember the pictures of the buildings, block after block, city after city, town after town, Sunni towns destroyed by Syria and Russia, just pulverized by these big barrel bombs. And did you see any protests at Columbia University about that? Did you see any of that anywhere? And so there's no difference between Hamas and ISIS. They're the same. By the way, here's another picture of Mosul. And it had to be done because they were embedded within that population. So now here's the video I want you to see. I'm going to play about 15 minutes. I tried to break this down, but I thought, no, these guys really, this is that good that I think you need to listen to it. By the way, in the show notes is a link to the full video. This is Gadi Taub and Professor Dan Shalport, I think is his name, from Haifa University. And the professor is very well spoken, and everything he says has impeccable logic and truth to it. There's other videos linked down there, some Caroline Glick interviews and stuff that I don't really have time to get to today. So Gadi Taub and a professor from Haifa University, I really think this is an important video.
We are honored to have Professor Dan Shiftan with us. Professor Shiftan, hello.
Good morning.
You are the head of the International Program for Studies of National Security in the University of Haifa. And we've discussed this war in Hebrew, and the bottom line of what you said is that this is a turning point in history, not just in Israeli history, but in history in general. So why don't we start with explaining that?
Well, what we're facing now is the first full-scale new kind of war where the barbarians managed to take the war out of the battlefield, because on the one hand, you have enough technologies that used to be available only to superpowers, and now it's available in the supermarket, like rockets, guiding systems, ballistic missiles. things that you don't need a superpower to produce, a technology that is available to practically everybody, so they can hit our civilian population, the major centers of Israeli civilian population, from within their civilian population. I mean, first of all, it's not their people that have to fight. It's a simple technology that you can send, and once you've sent it, you don't even need to control it. You don't need sophisticated people on the other side. You don't need brave people on the other side. You simply need weapons of mass destruction, but not in the original sense of nuclear or biological weapons, but weapons that can hit centers of population and bring about the kind of destruction that you cannot ignore, that you cannot say, okay, I will contain it. You must somehow reply to it, otherwise a civilized country cannot function. And the second point beyond the technology, which is tremendously important, perhaps more important, is that the major weapon that they're using against civilized people are the values of these civilized people. In other words, they're saying, we want to kill your children, and we know you don't want to kill our children, but we'll make you kill our children, because we will have these weapons in schools and in mosques and in inhabited neighborhoods, heavily inhabited neighborhoods, so that when you respond, you will have to kill our civilian population, and then the outrage of the entire civilized world will force you to stop the war. And therefore, we can destroy you with impunity. Gaza is the most fortified position ever in the history of wars, because it is not only fortified by weapons and tunnels and basically an underground city in Gaza, it is also fortified with the New York Times and the Washington Post and Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International and basically all Western media, and recently, much more serious, is the entire international judicial system, so that you will be considered war criminals because you defend yourself. If you don't defend yourself, we will defeat you. And if you will defend yourself, your own values will defeat you. Maybe even your own population will say, we are not willing to engage in this kind of war. It happens in other countries, not with Israel, but in other countries that say, we will take some defensive measures and hit some missile sites on the other side or some radars on the other side, like the Americans and the British in Yemen. But when it comes to where the weapons are really coming from and where the war is really waged from, we cannot act because this will constitute a war crime. So the new kind of war is the kind where barbarians hope to win because they are barbarians. And by the way, they say so. Hamas in Gaza officially says, we will win this war because we love death, and you will lose this war because you cherish life. And this is not only their de facto strategy, but even their outspoken strategy. They will defeat liberalism, pluralism, democracy by being more and more barbarian. And by the way, to a very large extent, it works, because here come the Palestinians and behave in a barbaric way. By the way, not just Hamas, with the support, with the overwhelming support of the population in Gaza, and even in the beginning of the war, much higher support in the West Bank, measured by Palestinian pollsters. So they are saying, we the Palestinian people have used against you the weapons that give us satisfaction, decapitating babies, raping women, and taking hostages. And the result is that the whole world gets up in the morning, and on the Western democratic pluralistic side, They say now it's very urgent to have an independent Palestinian state, and now it's very urgent to see to it that Palestinians have humanitarian assistance. So it works. The motivation to refrain from war is basically annulled. And what Israel needs to do, and it's extremely difficult, is on the one hand, maintain our values, but on the other hand, cause so much pain on the other side that they will not perpetuate this war every day. They may perpetuate it for centuries in the sense that they never give up, and they haven't given up for a century with their aim of destroying the Jewish state. But for a while, for a long while, we've had eruptions of hostilities only rarely, and Israel could use the time between the eruptions in order to fulfill its constructive role, to build a better economy, a more diverse culture, a more developed economic system, human rights inside the country.
You've used the phrase in Hebrew. You've used the phrase in Hebrew, Sparta outwardly and Athens inwardly.
Yes, in a book that I've written on the subject, on the objectives of Israel's national objectives, I use the term as one of the objectives of Israel to combine the ability to be Sparta vis-a-vis our enemies and Athens inside. So you are an enemy that they cannot afford to have actively working against them when they attack Israel. And at the same time, Israel maintains its open society system and succeeds in being constructive. This is what Israel is all about. So you need to be Sparta to stay alive, and you need to be Athens to have a meaning to your living in terms of the quality of life, in terms of the values you want to pursue. So what is at stake is not will Israel win for Israel's sake. Israel must win, not only so that it can survive, but also that it's very clear that we don't have a new kind of war where the bad guys will systematically win because they are barbarians, because they have no limits. Now, they very often win inside their country. For instance, the Assad regime won the civil war because there is no limits to the barbarity of Syria. They were willing to kill about 600,000 of their own people with the assistance of Russia, by the way. And this barbarism works for them because Assad is still in power. You have the barbarism of the Basij in Iran. And one of the major reasons this regime remains in power is the unlimited barbarism of this regime. So it works inside the countries that pursue this barbaric policy. But if it works vis-a-vis civilized people, and now Israel is the test, then the implications are global. And here again, the Jews are the proverbial canary that indicates...
Canary in the mine, in the coal mine.
In the coal mine, yeah. Indicating that the poison is so serious that you have to do something about it. And Israel will do something about it and is doing something about it in spite of the opposition, not only of the barbaric side of the international community, but also the opposition of media in most Western countries, a very large number of governments in on the democratic side of the world, and the judicial system, of course, the international system that is totally prostituted by the fact that the majority in the United Nations and other international organizations, it is ruled by the majority, and the majority are authoritarian, totalitarian, or barbaric countries. So the product cannot be anything but the anti-Semitism of the Secretary General of the United Nations. And every international organization is prostituted by the fact that it is dominated by the majority of countries that don't have a system of one person, one vote, and they have a system on the international level of one country, one vote.
So Israel has to defeat not only Hamas and its barbarian backers. It also has to fight against maybe I should call it an autoimmune deficiency in the West, where the West is turning against its own values by groveling at the feet of these barbarians. And the barbarians have learned to use Western values, Western guilt feelings, Western lifestyle and comfort in order to create a system in which the West cannot fight this war or finds it hard to fight this war.
Yes, we have here a combination between a society, the Arab society, that is never willing to take responsibility for what they're guilty for, with a society that is delighted to feel guilty about things they're not guilty for. Are they guilty for what happened during the terms of colonialism? Yes. Is the post-colonial policy willing to take guilt for any barbarism of the post-colonial countries? Unfortunately, yes.
Okay, so you get the point. Impeccable logic he's talking about is, and I think a couple points to take away from that extended clip. Gaza, Hamas in Gaza is the most fortified battle front entity in the history of humanity. Process that. So it would make sense that Israel is having trouble with it, but the problem in the West is we don't fight at the level that they fight. And so his other point is we have to be Sparta to our enemies and Athens internally in our countries. And that's very difficult to do. And so now what we're seeing, though, is these scenes coming out, and I do think they're intimately related. I talked to Mark Sutherland a lot about this the other day. You're having the UK seems to be on the brink of a civil war. And you get in a lot of trouble for saying that in the UK. They don't like that. And so they're probably the basis for some of these protests and that type of thing turned out to not be exactly right. They said that this person was an immigrant that stabbed these girls in Southport, and they were stabbed. And I don't know the guys, again, you can kind of get an idea of where the guy who did the crime is coming from when you can't find anything out about him. They put up a picture of him when he was 12, but that's not what he looks like today. He killed these little girls. They were at a Taylor Swift happy party or something like that. And so he stabbed them to death. 3, I think they were all in the same family, like between 6 and 9, 5 and 9. One daughter survived. And so the word became, well, he's an immigrant of a certain religion, and they started protests, and now, so the complaint in the UK has been this problem with what they call two-tier policing. We know what two-tier policing here is in the United States. If you protest at an abortion clinic, you're going to prison. If you burn down a federal courthouse in Portland or other cities, nothing happens to you. That's called two-tier policing. The same thing is happening in England, where the protesters against the religion of immigrants, the large number of immigrants, and believe me, I've been to England. It's been 5 years ago. Let me tell you, England has changed. Well, I guess I was just over there last year too. It's changed dramatically. I mean, London, it's unbelievable. I saw Princess Kate going to a meeting with someone. She was wearing a headscarf. Princess Kate. And by the way, she went to shake the hand of the man, and he pulled his hand back to the princess. I mean, and this is in London, in England, and it's terrible. So here's another one. So this one guy, he got up and said, with the Labor Party, he's been kind of booted out now, but he said, we need to, if people don't agree with us, they're protesting against us, we should cut their throats. Now, that he didn't get arrested